He had not stopped for a stranger in 10 years. Not once. Not on the long northern roads that cut through the hills of Colorado. Not in snow. Not in rain. Not even when a wagon wheel lay broken beside the ditch and a family waved for help. Finch Calloway rode past them all with the same steady face and the same unshaken purpose. But that night, the storm was different. And so was she. The wind tore across the open land like something angry and alive. Yet it howled through the tall pines outside Winterest Ridge and slammed against the stone walls of Calloway Manor. Rain struck the ground so hard, it seemed to accuse the earth itself. The sky was split again and again by white lightning, each flash turning the world silver for a heartbeat before dropping it back into darkness. Finch Calloway, Duke of Winterest Ridge, stood at the tall window of his study and watched the storm with a face as still as carved granite. That people said he looked like stone, cold as it, hard as it, untouched by anything that tried to move him. He did not argue with them. Stone did not grieve. Stone did not remember. Stone did not hate. But Finch did. Behind him, resting open on his desk, lay his father's final ledger. The last page held numbers written in shaking ink and a sentence Finch had memorized long ago. They ruined us. The Ashford name had taken everything. Land, money, pride, and in the end, his father's health. Yet when Robert Calloway died, it was not fever that carried him to the grave. It was disgrace. Finch had stood at that grave in the frozen ground of December and made a vow so quiet no one else heard it. The Ashfords will pay. He had carried that promise like a blade inside his chest for 10 years. Lightning cracked across the sky again. His jaw tightened. The north fence would not survive this wind. Repairing wood was simpler than thinking about the past. He turned from the window. It reached for his coat and stepped into the storm. Outside, the world felt wild and lawless. The rain came sideways. The wind pulled at his hat and tried to shove him back toward the house. His horse, Argos, moved forward with strong, careful steps, steam rising from his dark body in the cold night air. Finch knew every inch of the North Road. He had ridden it since he was a boy. He knew where the ground dipped and where the mud gathered. He knew the narrow bridge near the old oak and the bend where wagons often slowed. He did not know that tonight, something waited for him there. Argos stopped before Finch saw it. The horse stiffened beneath him, ears sharp, breath heavy. Finch raised the lantern hanging from his saddle. The light swung wildly in the wind. At first, he saw only pale fabric against dark mud. Then he saw her. She lay on her side in the middle of the road, her dress soaked through, clinging to her body. Where her dark hair was loose and tangled with leaves. One arm lay at a strange angle. Rain struck her face without mercy. Finch was on the ground before he had fully thought. He knelt in the mud, uncaring of the cold that soaked through his trousers. He pressed his fingers to her neck. For one long second, there was nothing. Then, a pulse. Faint. Weak. But there. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Her skin was cold. Too cold. Her lips pale. A thin cut marked her brow. It washed almost clean by the rain. She would not survive the night if left here. He did not hesitate. Finch slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than he expected. That simple fact unsettled him more than it should have. Her head fell against his chest as he lifted her. Her hair brushed his jaw. Her hands were like ice against his coat. He mounted Argos carefully, holding her against him with one arm while guiding the horse with the other. But he spread his coat as much as he could around her body, shielding her from the wind. He did not look at her face again. There was no need. She was breathing. That was enough. By the time they reached Calloway Manor, the storm had begun to weaken, though rain still fell hard against the stone walls. Mrs. Pratt, the housekeeper, opened the door with wide eyes when she saw him carrying an unconscious woman in his arms. "Spare room," Finch said calmly. "Hot water, blankets. Send for Dr. Hale." He carried her up the stairs himself. The hall was quiet at that hour. Firelight flickered along the walls. The great house felt different at night. Softer. Less proud. He laid her carefully on the bed in the guest room near the south wing, where the fireplace was already prepared for winter nights. Mrs. Pratt moved quickly, issuing orders to the maids. Finch stepped back only when he was forced to. He stood in the hallway outside her door for a long moment, a water dripping from his coat onto the polished wood floor. Inside he could hear low voices, the rustle of blankets, the crackle of a fire catching. He told himself he did not care who she was. He told himself he had only done what any decent man would have done. He went to his study and poured a glass of whiskey he did not drink. Morning came pale and quiet. The storm had washed the sky clean. Frost clung to the grass outside. A sunlight slipped through the tall windows and stretched across the wooden floors. She woke slowly. The first thing she felt was warmth. Not the sharp burn of sudden heat, but deep, steady warmth. Blankets. Fire. Safety. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was high and white. The room smelled faintly of pine wood and clean linen. A fire burned gently to her right. She sat up too quickly. The room swayed. Her hand rose to her brow and found a clean bandage. Memory returned in pieces. Up the road and the storm, the moment she realized she would not reach shelter in time. And then darkness. She looked around again. Calloway Manor. Her heart tightened. Of all places. The door opened softly. Mrs. Pratt entered with a tray of tea and toast, her face kind, but watchful. "You gave us a fright last night," she said gently. "His Grace found you on the North Road." His Grace. The words landed heavily. "I should thank him," the young woman said, her voice rough from cold. My name is—" She stopped. For a second, she considered lying. But she had not come all this way to hide. "My name is Eliza Ashford." Mrs. Pratt did not drop the tray. She did not gasp. But something in her eyes changed. "I see," she said quietly. "I will inform His Grace that you are awake." Finch was in the library when Mrs. Pratt found him. He had slept little. The fire before him had burned low. He held a book open, but had not turned a page. "She is awake," Mrs. Pratt said, but he nodded once. She gave her name. His hand stilled on the arm of his chair. Eliza Ashford. The name struck him like cold steel. For a long moment, he did not move. He had carried an Ashford into his home. He had shielded her with his coat. He had listened outside her door to make sure she lived. Ashford, the name he had sworn to destroy. He rose slowly. "I will see her," he said. He knocked once before entering. She sat upright in the bed, and her dark hair braided loosely over one shoulder. She looked younger in daylight, not fragile, but steady. Her eyes were clear and intelligent. She met his gaze without fear. "You know who I am," she said softly. "Yes." Silence filled the room. "I did not come here by accident," she continued. "I was on my way to see you." His expression did not change. "Why?" "My father is dead," she said. "Before he died, I found letters. Letters that change what happened between our families." The air in the room seemed to shift. Finch stepped further inside, though he kept distance between them. "You believe there is more to the story," he said evenly. "Yes." He studied her face. This was the daughter of the man he had hated for a decade. This was the name that had shaped his grief, yet she had nearly died on his road. "You may remain here 3 days," he said finally. "Recover your strength. After that, you will leave." She nodded. "Thank you," she said. "For the road." He turned to go. "Your Grace," she added. He paused. "I know what my name costs you." He did not answer. But in the hallway, with the door closed behind him, Finch Calloway pressed his hand against the wall and stood very still. And he had sworn to hate her, and already something inside him had shifted. He did not know it yet. But the storm had not ended when the rain stopped. It had only begun. Finch Calloway had built his life on distance. Distance from London society. Distance from gossip. Distance from the name Ashford. Now the distance inside his own house felt harder to maintain. Eliza Ashford recovered quickly. By the second morning, she was walking through the south hallway with steady steps, and her posture calm, her expression composed in a way that suggested she had learned long ago how to carry herself carefully in rooms that were not welcoming. Finch avoided her. Winterest Ridge was large enough for it. The manor had long corridors, high ceilings, rooms that had not been used in years. He spent more time in his study and the stables. He rode longer. He returned later. He told himself it was discipline. He told himself it was control. But every time he heard her voice drifting faintly from the library or saw her silhouette near the garden window, something in him tightened. On the second afternoon, he entered the library earlier than usual. He stopped in the doorway. She was there. Eliza sat near the tall south window, sunlight falling across her dark hair. A book rested open in her hands, though her eyes were not moving. She looked thoughtful rather than distracted, not as if she were arranging thoughts carefully before speaking them. She looked up when she sensed him. For a moment, neither spoke. "I was told you prefer the library in the evenings," she said gently. "I do." "I can leave." "No." The word came too quickly. She studied him quietly, but did not comment. She lowered her eyes to the page again. Finch crossed the room to his desk. He pulled out a chair and sat. The silence between them was not empty. It felt aware. After several minutes, and she closed the book. "May I ask you something?" she said. He did not look up immediately. "You may." "Did you always hate my family?" she asked. "Or did something specific happen?" His pen paused above the paper. "That is not a simple question." "No," she said softly. "I did not expect it to be." He set the pen down. "My father lost everything," he said calmly. "Land, investments, trust. It happened slowly, through agreements that were legal but structured to ensure his failure. Sure, those agreements were arranged by your father." Eliza listened without interruption. "He died believing he had failed us," Finch continued. "He believed he had been careless, weak. He never knew the collapse had been engineered." Eliza's hands tightened slightly on the book. "My father died in August," she said after a moment. "I found letters in his desk after his death, letters that suggest the situation may not have been as clear as it appeared." Finch met her eyes. You believe your father innocent?" "No," she said immediately. "Not innocent, but perhaps not alone." The words settled between them. Finch rose from his chair slowly. "Miss Ashford," he said evenly, "I have spent 10 years building a clear understanding of what happened. I would ask you not to suggest lightly that it was mistaken." "I would never suggest lightly," she replied. That is why I came myself." He held her gaze for a long moment. 3 days, he reminded her. Yes, she said. But the silence after that reminder felt different. That night, Finch could not sleep. He walked the corridors of the manor with restless steps before finally drifting toward the library. Light glowed beneath the door. He opened it. Eliza stood by the fireplace, a shawl around her shoulders, staring into the flames. She turned when she heard him. "I could not sleep," she said simply. "Neither could I." He moved inside and closed the door. The fire crackled softly, and shadows shifted across the shelves. Without speaking further, Finch sat on the rug near the fire. He rarely allowed himself such informality. He did not know why he did now. Eliza hesitated only briefly before sitting a few feet away. For a time, they simply listened to the fire. "My father used to sit here," Finch said quietly. "This was his room. He believed books made a man honest." Eliza looked at the shelves. "My father disliked reading," she admitted. "He preferred numbers. He trusted them too easily." Finch glanced at her. "Was he kind?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised her. "Yes," she said after a moment. "Not wise, not careful, but kind in small, steady ways. He loved us." Finch nodded slowly. "My father was principled," he said. "He never bent." "And when something breaks a man like that," Eliza said softly, "it breaks everything around him." Their eyes met. For the first time, the hatred felt less sharp. Not gone, but less certain. Why come yourself?" Finch asked. "You could have sent the letters." "Because letters can be ignored," she replied. "A person cannot." He almost smiled at that. Almost. On the third morning, frost coated the gardens. Eliza found him outside trimming back a hedge with precise movements. She approached slowly. "I have something to show you," she said. She handed him 6 folded letters. He hesitated only briefly before taking them. He read carefully. The letters were written by her father to a man named Richard Carver. They described financial arrangements, pressure, advice given, warnings ignored. Carver had proposed the structure. Carver had positioned both families against each other. Carver had profited from both. Finch read them twice. When he looked up, the cold air felt sharper in his lungs. "Carver," he said quietly. "He approached my father years before the collapse. My father refused him." Eliza swallowed. Then he went to mine." "Yes." They stood in silence. "My father believed he was protecting his estate," she said slowly. "He believed your father had already moved against him. He had not." "I know." The truth settled heavy and complex between them. "Your father still chose to profit," Finch said steadily. "Yes," she agreed. "And that choice hurt your family. I will not excuse it." He studied her face. She was not defending blindly. She was not pleading. She was offering truth, and that unsettled him more than anger would have. From inside the house, the front bell rang. Later that afternoon, Lord Ashbourne visited unexpectedly. His eyes moved too carefully between Finch and Eliza. His smile lingered too long. By evening, it was clear what would happen. London would talk. Eliza stood by the window after Ashbourne left, watching his carriage disappear. "You understand what this means," she said quietly. Yes. My reputation will suffer." "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Finch turned toward her fully. "There is a solution," he said. She waited. "Marry me." The words hung in the air. "Not for sentiment," he added quickly. "For protection, for practicality." She looked at him steadily. "Ask me properly," she said. He drew in a slow breath. "Eliza," he said, her name firm and clear. "Will you marry me?" The question felt heavier than he expected. I will consider it," she replied. "Until morning." He did not sleep that night. He walked the library again. He read his father's old letters. He thought about vows made in grief. He thought about the way she had stood in the garden holding those letters with steady hands. In the morning, she entered the breakfast room early. "Yes," she said. The word struck him with unexpected force. "I have conditions," she continued calmly. "The truth about Carver must be pursued. My brother must always be welcome here. And whatever this marriage becomes, it must be honest. No pretending." He nodded. Agreed. The engagement shifted the atmosphere of the house, not loudly, but something loosened. Finch wrote to his solicitor regarding Carver. 3 days later, Mrs. Pratt found a small wooden box in storage. Inside were older letters, the letters from Carver to Finch's father. They confirmed everything. Carver had manipulated both sides from the beginning. Finch read them standing. When he found Eliza in the garden that afternoon, he handed them to her without a word. She read quickly. "My father believed a lie," she whispered. "Yes." They stood facing each other in the cold sunlight. 11 years, she said softly. "Yes." He reached out then and covered her hand with his. The gesture was deliberate, careful, real. But the next morning, he found her packed and ready to leave. "We agreed on 3 days," she said calmly. "We agreed on an engagement." "We agreed under pressure," she replied gently. "You need time, without obligation." He knew she was right. That made it worse. "Write to me," she said at the door. "I will." She left that morning in a carriage bound for her aunt's home in Boston. Finch stood in the doorway long after the carriage disappeared down the road. Besides, but Pratt cleared her throat quietly behind him. "If you let that one go," she said, "I shall be disappointed." Finch did not answer, but for the first time in 10 years, the vow he had carried felt less like strength, and more like a wall he was no longer certain he wished to maintain. The house felt larger after she left, not quieter, just emptier. Finch Calloway stood in the library 3 mornings after Eliza's departure, staring at the south window where she had once sat reading. But the chair remained slightly angled toward the light, as if she might return at any moment. He had told himself her absence would restore order. Instead, it unsettled him. The letters from Carver lay open on his desk. The evidence was clear now. The ruin of 2 families had not begun with deliberate hatred, but with careful deception. Carver had sown suspicion like seed and harvested profit from the damage. Finch had written to his solicitor in Denver. Investigations had begun. The bank records were being traced, old partners questioned, but none of it quieted the shift inside him. For 10 years, he had carried anger like armor. It had given him shape, purpose, direction. Without it, he felt exposed. That realization disturbed him more than he liked. He sat at his desk and unfolded the letter she had written the day after reaching Boston. Her handwriting was steady, precise. She had written of her aunt's townhouse near Beacon Hill, and of gray harbor mornings and carriage wheels on wet cobblestones, of her brother writing from school, unaware yet of how much the truth had changed. At the bottom of the page, she had written one line that Finch had read more times than he admitted. "I would rather build something honest than inherit something broken." He folded the letter carefully. That afternoon, he rode north alone. The sky was clear, the road dry. He stopped at the exact place where he had found her. The mud was gone, but grass lay flattened only slightly where rain had once struck hard. He dismounted. For a moment, he stood in silence. If he had ridden faster that night, if Argos had not stopped, if he had chosen, as he had chosen so many times before, not to interfere. The thought unsettled him deeply. He could not imagine the road without that choice. He returned to the manor with decision forming quietly but firmly in his chest. The following week, news arrived from his solicitor. The evidence against Carver was substantial. Fraud, false reports, manipulated accounts. Carver would face investigation and likely charges. Finch read the report once, then set it aside. He did not feel triumph. He felt clarity. That evening he wrote to Eliza. He did not write cautiously. He did not write like a duke managing reputation. He wrote like a man who had finally stopped hiding behind a vow. He wrote about his father, about the library, about the moment in the garden when he realized anger had become easier than grief. He wrote about the storm. I told myself I stopped because it was duty, he wrote. I know now it was something else. He sealed the letter before he could reconsider a single word. The reply did not come quickly. Days passed. Then a note arrived from Boston, shorter than her usual letters. Carver's arrest has been announced in the papers here. I am glad truth moves forward. She wrote nothing else personal. Finch read the letter twice. Something in its restraint told him more than pages might have. 3 days later, he made his decision. He traveled east. The journey to Boston took several days by rail and carriage. He spent most of it staring out windows at passing towns and wide stretches of countryside. The world looked larger than it had in years. When he arrived at the townhouse on Beacon Hill, rain was falling softly against brick and iron railings. He did not send a card ahead, but he knocked. The maid opened the door and blinked at the tall, serious man standing on the steps in a dark coat damp with travel. His Grace, the Duke of Winterest Ridge, he said calmly. Moments later, Eliza stood in the sitting room doorway. For a heartbeat, neither moved. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pinned neatly, her composure intact. You did not write that you were coming, she said quietly. I decided a letter would take too long. Her fingers tightened slightly at her sides. Is Carver resolved? She asked. He will face trial, Finch said. The evidence is strong. She nodded once. That is good. He stepped closer. That is not why I came. She met his eyes steadily. I hoped it was not. He stopped a few feet from her. I have considered what you said before you left, he began, about needing time. What about choosing freely? The fire in the room burned low and steady. I built my life around a vow, he continued. It shaped my decisions. It shaped who I allowed myself to be. I believed it was strength. He paused. It was fear. Her breath caught slightly, though her face remained calm. Fear of what? She asked. Of losing again, he answered honestly. Of caring about something that could be taken. Silence filled the space between them. When I carried you from that road, he said quietly, I did not know your name. But I knew one thing with certainty. She waited. I did not want to leave you there. The words were simple, but they were the truest he had spoken in years. Eliza took one slow step toward him. And now? She asked softly. Now, he said, voice steady. I do not want to leave you anywhere. The room seemed to still. He reached out, not abruptly, but with careful intention, and touched her hand. I asked you to marry me for protection, he said. I was wrong. She looked up at him. I am asking again, he continued. Not for reputation, not for practicality, but because in the space of a storm and 4 days at Winterest Ridge, you dismantled a wall I had spent 10 years building. Her eyes shone, though she did not look away. "You showed me the truth when it would have been easier to let me remain wrong," he added. "But you gave me honesty before I gave you any reason to trust it." He drew a steady breath. "Eliza Ashford, will you marry me because you choose me, not because circumstance forced us together?" The rain tapped softly against the windows. She studied his face. Not the Duke, not the title, the man. "You are not stone," she said gently. "You never were." His jaw tightened slightly at the truth of it. "Yes," she said. The word was quiet but firm. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight he had carried too long. He stepped closer, lifting his hand to her face with reverence rather than urgency. His thumb brushed her cheek lightly. "For honesty," she reminded him softly. "For honesty," he agreed. He kissed her then, not as a gesture of arrangement, not as a performance, but as a choice. The world outside continued as it always had. Rain fell. Carriages passed. The city breathed. Inside the small Boston sitting room, a duke who had once sworn hatred and a woman who had walked into his house carrying truth stood close without fear between them. Weeks later, they returned together to Winterest Ridge. The house no longer felt empty. It felt open. Mrs. Pratt greeted Eliza not as a guest, but as something firmly claimed. Finch led her through the library first. "This was my father's room," he said. "It is yours now," she replied. He shook his head slightly. "But it will be ours." Outside, winter settled over the Colorado hills. Frost covered the fields. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued steady and strong. The trial of Richard Carver concluded in early spring. His schemes were laid bare in court. Both families were named victims of deliberate manipulation. Reputations shifted. Truth settled where anger once stood. On a clear April morning, beneath open sky and before a small gathering of family, Finch Calloway married Eliza Ashford in the chapel near Winterest Ridge. There was no grand display, no forced celebration, only steady vows spoken clearly. When Finch looked at her as she said her promises, he understood something he had not understood at his father's grave 10 years before. Vows made in grief bind tightly. Vows made in truth build something stronger. That night, long after guests had departed and candles burned low, Finch stood once more at the tall window overlooking the North Road. The same stretch of land where storm and choice had met. Eliza joined him quietly, her hand slipping into his. "Thinking?" she asked. "Yes." "Of the storm?" He glanced down at her, a faint smile touching his expression. "Yes." She leaned lightly against him. "I am glad you stopped," she said. He tightened his hold on her hand. "So am I." Outside, the road lay calm beneath moonlight. No storm, no anger. Only the quiet understanding that sometimes the moment that threatens to break everything is the same moment that begins it. And the place where he had once sworn to hate became the place where he chose to love.